All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and people who don't define themselves as either of those two things. My name is Lee Thomas, and this is Crazy Talk. If you are just tuning in for the first time, Crazy Talk is a Facebook Live TV show where we talk about all things mental health related. I'm your host, Lee Thomas, and I'm going to interview a bunch of different guests all about various things that are related to mental health in some way, because we know mental health is such an important topic, and it's so important to keep conversations like this going, and that's really the point of this show. So we are very lucky today to have our guest on, who's going to be on today, and our guest today is Moe Amin, my friend. Hi, how's it going, Mo?
Going well. How's it going with you?
Oh, it's going. It's great to have you on the show. Mo is joining us from Saudi Arabia today, which is really, really exciting. And fortunately, the time change is not too drastic. You're not calling us at the dead of night or the early in the morning. It's kind of a reasonable time for both of us, which is really nice. And Mo, today you're going to be talking to us about, well, we're going to start off by talking about self-esteem. Who knows where the conversation is going to go, right? So you kind of messaged me and said that, you wanted to talk about self-esteem, which I think is such an important topic and so important for people to hear about. But why is self-esteem a topic that you are interested in?
Oh, it's a topic that I have experienced with many people. I counsel a lot of people that I have met on a daily basis, and they have issues with self-esteem. So, and let's talk about what is self-esteem. It's just self-esteem, the way I view it, is that you either view yourself in a positive or a negative perspective. And those can come from many factors. But not telling you to always be positive, but you don't want to be in the negative area. You want to kind of find a balance, at least be a balance, if not positive, in order to have a safe mental space in your head to live your daily life. So I think that's completely important. I'll give you an example. There was a student at one time that graduated from a university and was trying to do his master's. He applied to so many universities. He went to one of the top universities, and he managed to get his foot in the door and convinced the prof. And the prof asked him, "Give me your transcript. I want to see your transcript before we finalize this." The prof got the transcript. The guy waited a day or two, and then he decided, "I'm going to go check what's going on." He went and saw the prof, and the prof told him, "I'm surprised that you're here, because your transcript says one of two things: that you're really smart, but you're lazy, or that there's just something wrong with you." Something along those lines. That person took it in a really bad way. He didn't say anything to the prof, I guess, at least from what I heard, but he was kind of isolated himself a little bit because it affected his self-esteem. He's been working on this for a very long time, and he really wanted to get into a master's program. So he kind of worked on his self-esteem after. And we'll get to that. However, I would like to tell you that person right now has a scholarship and is heading to do his master's very soon. So there's always a positive somewhere.
Yeah, all right. And finding that positive. And I want to go back to something that you said about how self-esteem comes from a lot of different places. I'm kind of paraphrasing, but you said how self-esteem has a lot of different kind of sources. And I mean, my background is a lot with eating disorders and that kind of thing. And we talk about the role that, culture and society plays in the way we feel about ourselves. And I mean, specifically with eating disorders, we often talk about body image, but with self-esteem in general, if we are constantly getting messages from, our society saying that we need to be better than we are or be different than we are, how is it possible to have good self-esteem in a culture that's telling us that we're not good enough?
there are two things that I think are important in this aspect. One is oneself, and the other one is the surrounding community. So in terms of oneself, we all talk to ourselves, whether we like to admit it or not. But there are two types of talking to yourself. There's negative talk and there's positive talk. And from your experience, can be either negative or positive, but let's focus on the negative for now. If you're having a negative experience, some people tend to focus on negative self-talk. But the proper way of dealing with a negative, those negative feelings, is to give yourself positive talk. Positive talk where, okay, well, I have this certain issue. Let's go, for example, with that student. This guy said that there is a problem with my grades. Well, I'll go ask my professors. Then the professor replies, well, yeah, you kind of did badly, but at the same time, you kind of improved. You need to focus on bettering your grade, maybe do another degree. So they'll give examples of what to do. You as yourself, you want to focus on just like, okay, this guy said something or she said something, but I need to know how to improve. This is my area. So let's assume somebody didn't tell him to do another degree to get to where he wanted to go or she wanted to go. So what does he need to do? Well, getting into a master's can be done in many ways. One of the ways that I know of is actually convincing the profs through reading their research and talking to them about the research. Not, okay, I understand that this research is about such and such. No, get into details, offer some insight, ask detailed questions, grab the prof's attention, because they'll associate the grades, and then they'll also associate, before they see the grades, they already had a good conversation with you about the research they're presenting. So what I'm saying is you need to work on yourself in a positive perspective and walk away from the negative talk. Positive talk to yourself is important. Negative talk shouldn't be there. It can be there momentarily. It's okay if it happens. Just don't dwell on it.
Yeah.
And then you have your friends or your community. Those people, it really, your surrounding. If you are surrounded by good people, they will tell you, okay, maybe what he said is true, maybe it's not true, but I know you can do better. Just the fact that somebody tells you they're doing better makes a difference.
Yeah.
You were going to say something?
Oh, I was just going to say that whole, that negative self-talk piece can be really tempting for people in a lot of ways. You know what I mean? Like it can be a habit for people to talk to themselves in a negative way. And when that negative talk is so deeply ingrained in how that person speaks to themselves and how that person interacts with the world, it can be really difficult, I think, to walk away from that.
I agree with you, but at the same time, some of those people actually look at that not rather a negative talk. They take that negative perspective and make it into a challenge, right? Mm. They thrive on the pressure of the negativity to make something positive, knowingly or unknowingly. I've seen both, and honestly, it's just amazing that just to transfer that negativity into into something positive. Either, again, knowingly or unknowingly. Some people don't know that they're doing it, but they do it anyways.
Okay. So if someone was dealing with, say, negative thoughts and they were trying to transform them into positive thoughts, is there like, do you have any tips or tricks in terms of how people could do that?
Reading. I personally wasn't a reader before, but it depends on what kind of area you're experiencing negativity. Sometimes going to a specialist is also the right thing to do. asking friends to help you out. If you see if there is a negativity around you that's causing you harm, there are multiple sources, but the ones that I can think on top of my head are just books, because books are usually reliable, because the internet has a lot of information. Some of them are good, some of them are bad, but we tend to be able to find the good most of the time. And your good friends will always kind of guide you in the right direction if they care for you.
Yeah, and I like that idea of, I think for a lot of people, we see self-esteem as a very individual phenomenon. We see it as something that like an individual struggles with and an individual has to overcome. But I really like that you're talking about that community piece as well, because I think that gets overlooked a lot in our conversations about self-esteem and in our conversations about mental health, just how important that community piece can be, because human beings are, we're social creatures. We're meant to have communities. We're meant to have other people lift us up and to lift other people up as well.
Yes, your community affects you greatly, either in both aspects, negative or positive. So you want to surround yourself with good people. And just add on that, sometimes you are put in a place where you're surrounded by negative people. But it's just how you deal with that negativity is what makes you unique in that specific area. Let's put an example here. Somebody working in an area, he's very qualified. However, the people around him or her, they're good at the job, but they are too afraid of that person for any reason. Maybe he was going to get promoted or whatnot. But even in that area, you'll find people that are willing to help you. And even if you don't find people that are willing to help you, take the most out of it, because there are some positive experiences you can get, and look for another job while you're doing so. Get paid, look somewhere else. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that feeling of finding things to be grateful for in the situation that you're in, as well as expanding into new situations when you need to, I guess.
Exactly.
Fabulous.
That's...
So if you, I guess I was talking about a little bit earlier about how, our society and like globally can be very negative and have a really negative impact on people's self-esteem. Like I think negative self-talk is something that we're taught from, from our personal experiences, from our parents, from people in our lives who might talk negatively to themselves, from media, from advertising. Like we get negative images and negative messaging a lot in the world right now. So as an individual, I can focus on, walking away from that negativity and trying to focus on the positives and trying to focus on the positive of the situation that I'm in. But in terms of fixing that more, and this is a big question, but in terms of fixing that more global problem of negativity and negative messaging, do you have any ideas? Like if you had a magic wand, like what would you like to see fixed, I guess, about the messages that we're given from, the media and from society?
I would say if we focused on ourselves in terms of bettering ourselves and made ourselves examples of being better people, being better at what we do, with time, that will shine globally per se in this circumstances. It's just the fact that if I had a magic wand and I say, I don't want people to be judgmental, but is that really gonna happen? It couldn't be. But is being judgmental necessarily bad? Good. Sometimes you need to have good judgment, otherwise they wouldn't call it good judgment. So anything in the world can be used in multiple ways, but if we use the set of tools of what we have in the proper way, then I don't think we can get rid of everything. but we can try to focus on using it better.
Yeah, and I like that you brought up that like non-judgmental piece. I know we were talking about this before we jumped on the show. But I've been reading a lot of Brené Brown recently. And
Spoiler
one
alert.
of the things I know, and one of the things she was talking about in her newest book, Braving the Wilderness, is that non-judgmental piece, and how a lot of the time that non-judgmental piece has to start with us not judging ourselves. Because the example that she gave, and I talked about this on my Facebook page, the example that she gave was how when we judge ourselves for needing help, we also judge other people for needing help. And sometimes we think that we're holding ourselves to a different standard, but what we're really doing is attaching a value judgment to the act of needing help. And so if we're judging ourselves for that, we kind of can't avoid judging other people for that as well. So that non-judgmental piece has to start with us, when often we think of non-judgmental pieces as us not judging others or others not judging us, but it's really about us judging us. Which is a big piece to think about.
I'm processing. I heard you say it the first time. I'm still trying to process it the second time.
I know.
And honestly, for anybody who's hearing this, I kind of tend to play back a lot when I find something interesting. I would suggest to them either to read that book or to go back and listen to that phrase multiple times just to get the essence of what it means. Because when we read something, and I'm going off on a tangent, bear with me. When we read or hear or listen, well, hearing and listening is the same, but whatever. Actually, there is a difference. I'm not going to get into it. The essence of it varies from person to person, hearing it or saying it. So when somebody says something, we'd not necessarily listen to what they're actually saying. But though in those circumstances, I think we should focus on the positivity, because nobody intentionally tries to be bad. So if you focus on the positivity of what they're saying, I think you would be able to comprehend a much better knowledge of what you are reading or listening to.
Yeah.
See, I told you I'm going to go off on a tangent.
No, I love it. And speaking of tangents, let's go off on another small one, because we were talking earlier, you are a MEDEX certified life coach, which is great. And you were talking about just now how hearing and listening were different. And you said, I'm not going to go into that, but I'm thinking as a coach who probably listens to a lot of people and hears a lot of things, you would be in a good position to tell us, what is that difference between hearing and listening, especially when it comes to self-esteem and comes to ourselves.
I haven't reviewed my material in a while, so I'm going to give you my simple opinion as somebody who's not a coach. And honestly, when you listen to somebody, the essence of listening, and I think the word essence, I like it. This is why I'm using it too much. The essence of listening and comprehending what the person is saying for what they are saying. Is different from hearing. While you're hearing something, but it's not necessarily what is being told. And I'll say it again in a different way. When you are listening to what is actually being said. When you are hearing something, you can interpret it to what it has been told or said, or you can just make something up in your head that's completely non-relevant. So this is just an extreme case, but just to make the point. What do you think is the difference?
Oh man. Turning the questions back on me. I see what you're doing here, Mo. So I know in one of the courses that I teach, mental health first aid, we talk a lot about hearing versus listening, and we talk a lot about active listening and empathetic listening. And there's all sorts of like little tips and tricks that I teach the people who take mental health first aid. By the way, anyone who's listening, I have a mental health first aid course coming up February 10th and 11th. Reach out to me if you're interested.
I would attend if I was there.
Oh, I appreciate that. But we talk about, kind of like you said, like how hearing is a physiological process. Hearing is something that we all well, if we are hearing people, it's something that we do. Whereas listening is something that is really about us trying to process the information. And when we talk about empathetic listening, it's trying to process that information in a way that's going to be helpful for the other person. So, you know, and kind of the example you gave, empathetic listening and listening being something that we're listening to the words that they're saying instead of pushing our own agenda onto it.
Right on the point.
Nailed it. Did I pass the quiz, coach?
Yes, you did.
Oh, I nailed it. So I have a question, which, just because you are in a unique position to answer this, because, you know, you lived in Canada for a number of years and you're living in Saudi Arabia right now. Do you notice differences in the way that we talk about self-esteem, for instance? Like, do you notice that maybe Canadian students really struggle with their self-esteem, whereas in Saudi Arabia it's not such a big deal, or anything like that? Or is it pretty much the same across the globe or across the board?
I would say both.
Yeah.
Both in terms of self-esteem as an issue is faced globally, but at the same time, the way that people deal with it as well as feel it is different based on the culture itself also. So it's a really broad question, and I'm giving a much broader answer, so bear it. Basically, if you're talking about in culture aspects, yeah, it's different. But if you're talking about the essence of the issue, see, I told you I like the word essence. If you're talking about the essence of the issue, it is globally the same. We have a problem with self-esteem, and we need to face it for ourselves, not for somebody else, and improve on ourselves and be positive toward ourselves.
Yeah. And I feel like that kind of universality of the issue of self-esteem is something that we really don't talk about enough, because when people are struggling with their self-esteem and they feel like they're not good enough in some way, or not worthwhile enough, or not, you know, whatever it is enough, if they feel like they're not enough, often people try to disguise that feeling in a bunch of ways that is really not helpful for themselves or for the people around them or for like the world, right? Like all of this, again, going back into Brene Brown. I've just been reading so much Brene Brown lately, but just that feeling of vulnerability. And to me, vulnerability is about saying, you know, maybe I feel like I'm not enough, but I'm willing to own that feeling and be honest with that feeling. But I feel like a lot of people are so afraid of feeling like they're not enough that they go to really, really great lengths to disguise that feeling. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Is that something that, because I know you do a lot of like, you know, kind of casual coaching. And so is that something that you've, I guess, found in your experience with working with people on self-esteem topics or things like that? Like people are not only feeling like they're not good enough, but they're feeling like they can't tell anyone that they don't feel like they're not good enough. That's just not an okay thing
and
to say.
That's the most huge issue, right? Is just the fact of vulnerability of saying, I can't tell somebody else that I'm having a problem because that would make me vulnerable. But this is just my view of it. Vulnerability is good because it tells you need to work on something. And if you're not able to help yourself by, like we said, for example, reading about it and getting better, but know somebody who you think is a mentor or a role model that you want to be like, you want to go and ask them. And because if you think of them as a role model, you at least respect them and respect their opinions. So we would expect that their opinion matter in a positive aspect.
Yeah. And you've mentioned reading a couple of times, which is great because I am a big reader and I love reading. And I've recommended.
I'm a horrible reader. This is why I'm emphasizing you should read. I started reading lately. Like literally, most of what I read is scientific journals or scientific books. However, the past 2 to 3 years, I learned to read books that are not related to my field to better myself. And this is something I'm working on. I need to focus on reading.
And so do you have any, I guess, recommendations if someone was like, oh, I'm interested in like starting to read books to work on my self-esteem, like either a book that you've read or a website that you visit or anything like that you've read that you've
Give
found
me a
particularly
second.
helpful?
I actually have a book that I would suggest.
Okay,
I'm just going to
fabulous.
get it out of the closet here.
Okay. I'll just vamp until we get here.
Okay. Here we go. Found it.
Fabulous.
It's books. It's actually a New York Times bestseller, first bestseller. The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle.
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds like a great recommendation. I have not personally read it, but I trust your recommendation, and I'm trying to read 50 books this year, so maybe I will add that to my list.
It's indirectly related to self-esteem, but it has the aspects of. I'll summarize the book in a way. It's just you don't want to focus on the future, you don't want to focus on the past, you want to focus on the now. And I believe this is part of self-esteem. Is just like, okay, whatever's in the past is in the past. Whatever will happen in the future is happening in the future. I need to focus on now. And this in self provides positivity.
All right. I love that. I love that. Oh, that makes total sense. Absolutely. And I can't believe it, but we are already getting close to the end of our time. So if someone is listening to this conversation and they're thinking like, this is really speaking to me, this whole conversation about self-esteem is really speaking to me, what should I do now? What should I do next? What would you recommend for them to do next?
I think I covered that in this interview. I said it many times. But honestly, if you think that you need help and you can't do it yourself, go to an expert, go to a counselor or a therapist. If you think you need a therapist, go to a therapist. There is no shame in doing so. The fact that you're not going to do it is actually negatively impacting you. You want to better yourself. So if you need to work on yourself, if you think that you can't work on yourself, attend a workshop. So we don't just need to go to the extreme. There are mediums also. There are workshops. Like I remember in UMB, they provided many workshops for students who were bad at writing notes, and they improved. I'm one of them. If you have terrible grammar, there is the Writing Help Center. And those are things that when you're a student, they kind of affect your self-esteem in terms of, I'm terrible at writing. I'm terrible at writing notes. I'm not going to pass the class. But at the same time, you focus on it. Look for help if you can't help yourself. Don't be ashamed.
Okay. That's a great message for us to leave off on. So, Mo, I just want to thank you so much for being on the show. I really, really loved having you on here and for sharing all of your wonderful insights about self-esteem and about, the society and answering all of the big questions that I threw at you. So I really, really appreciate that.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. And if you're watching this show and you're thinking, wow, I am super enjoying these Crazy Talk episodes, you can see more episodes of Crazy Talk on my Facebook page at facebook.com/leethomasspeaks. That's all for today's show. Be sure to tune in next week, Saturdays at 12:30 Atlantic time. Thanks so much, guys.